making it a priority.
Yes.
All right, now, negative gearing. Anglicare did in fact identify this as driving up property prices. Now, the federal opposition says it's open to a conversation on the tax concession, but the government has already ruled out making any changes. With a look at the hows and whys of negative gearing, here's Mike Clay.
Tax minimisation is up there with the great Australian dream. Most of us aspire to it.
And if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads ripped. Because as a government, I can tell you, you're not spending it that well that we should be donating extra.
And negative gearing is a good way to get there, if you can afford it. Because, let's face it, most of us don't have money to lose up front. Because negative gearing only works when you spend more on your investment than you get back on profit. But that will reduce the overall tax that you pay on your income. Now, investments are supposed to make money, so why on earth would anyone want to lose money year after year? 4 words: capital gains tax concessions. Those 4 words mean I can afford to lose money every year, safe in the knowledge that when I do finally sell that property for a profit, I'll only pay half the tax I usually would if I'd earned the same money working. Pretty sweet deal.
All done. All silent. Going, selling. Sold.
In the year John Howard brought in the concession, just over 1 in 10 taxpayers owned a rental property. Together, they made almost $700 million in profit. Tidy. About a decade later, nearly 15% of taxpayers were landlords, but collectively they lost almost $8 billion. And those 2 policies cost the government money, around $5 billion a year. That's $5 billion they won't spend on other things, like, say, housing affordability or homelessness. For the 1.3 million taxpayers who do it, negative gearing is one big party, but not everyone's invited. Most negative gearers are in the top 40% of income earners, and the top 2% of earners claim half of all capital gains.
There is a very strong argument that if you were to abolish negative gearing, you would see a significant increase in rents.
When Bob Hawke did away with negative gearing in 1985, rents did shoot up in Sydney and Perth. But rents across the rest of the country either stayed stable or went down. And as for the idea that negative gearing keeps prices low by adding to supply, well, that's about as sound as a cheaply built McMansion. Just 5% of loans to housing investors are to buy new homes. The other 95% just push up prices by 9% or $52,000 on average.
There are 1.3 million taxpayers who are engaged in negative gearing of properties. That's almost 15% of the electorate. No government can afford to alienate such a large section of the electorate and expect to win election.
So, if it favours the rich while reducing tax revenue, what should we do? Phase it out, cap it, or just put it in the too hard basket? Income tax refund, collect $20.
That was Mike Clay with that report. Now, Bernard Keane, can we talk about political will? We seem to be presented with a very unsophisticated response, which is the electorate won't like it, therefore we're going to have to rule it out. What about all these other options? The grandfathering, phasing it out, capping the price of the property?
Well, when Chris Bowen was asked about negative gearing recently, he said, well, we're open to the idea, which is politically brave, good on him, but as long as there is sort of grandfathering protection for existing investors, and as long as it's not going, and this is, I thought, the most crucial thing, it was not going to undermine investment in new housing stock. And that's where negative gearing should be redirected. If only Joe was right about the fact about its impact on housing, but sadly, negative gearing is this massive multi-billion-dollar policy that is intensely distortionary, but not distortionary in the right direction. We want to get it distorting in the favour of new housing stock, not the existing housing stock and housing prices.
Can you see a scenario where this will be tackled, Tom?
No.
Great.
I think it's one of the, as in the American system where they say, you know, the third rail of policy, you know, touch it and it's death by electrocution.
With any of these caveats or protections?
It's possible. I think if you see negative gearing as a broad investment strategy or a broad investment instrument, clearly housing is one of those things. We want new housing. We want to add to the stock of housing, absolutely. But at the same time, you know, we've got to realise that there are other ripples throughout the economy. People who are accumulating property, the great aspirational Australian thing, saving for their own retirements, those sorts of things, building up their asset base, relying less on the state. Of course, we could make it better with some of those suggestions. We just need to sort of rejig it. I don't think there's much you can do about changing it, who it benefits, because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, it's those who have the means and who are required to pay tax are the ones that are most likely going to use it as a vehicle.
Georgina, what about young people? Every time I talk about the housing market, I mean, won't the generation moving up that was been locked out at some point shift to political balance so there's more pressure on these kinds of issues?
Look, I would hope so, but I also just think, isn't it such a poor indictment on our political leaders that when we are faced with significant problems, I mean, the housing affordability is one of them, but as we all know that we are facing legitimate problems right now, we do have a revenue problem, we need to tackle these sorts of things, and I just think we limit the potential to solve those problems if we rule out things immediately simply because there's not the political will for it, it's too damaging to the electorate. What if you came up with a solution, and what if you sold an idea to the electorate and actually took us on that journey and said, you know what, there's a bigger picture here? And I think that, you know, to me, I find it really dispiriting to think that the opening starting point is, oh no, we won't think about that. We're going to look only for problems within this very narrow band that we think are politically palatable to the electorate, and that's all we'll do.
All right, one more thing just before we go that Australians are ruling out. Apparently it's the bread roll. They've now